What do Nova Scotians need? Nova Scotians need a long-term, stable rates in insurance. That's the bottom line. That's exactly what Nova Scotians need. And if you put that in place and make that work, then it'll help Nova Scotians and things will move forward. Unfortunately, that isn't covered in this bill, and it definitely isn't covered in what the NDP is proposing. Long-term stable rates, one that you know that when you go this year, if you hit an accident-free record and you haven't changed vehicles that are in a high-risk range to a high-risk vehicle, that you know that your rate's going to be roughly the same as it was the year before, and with 3 or 4 years' time, it's going to be the same. That's the sort of things that we have to ensure in this bill. We have to make sure this bill addresses that. I don't believe this bill does that at this point, and we have to make sure this bill is changed, and through a law amendments process to make sure it's changed so that people have that opportunity and the stability that goes with that opportunity. You look at seniors that are trying to survive on fixed incomes, seniors that, if an insurance rate or any other cost goes up 2 or 3 or 5%, and all these things add together, first thing, they've got to move out of their homes, they've got to sell their vehicle, and reduces their mobility and the communities they used to live in. Those are things we have to protect. We really have to protect in the future. We also have to try to do something for the young driver that has taken the proper driver training, has a clean driving record, and really is safety conscious. I know that the accidents among youth are much higher than the rest of the population, but there has to be a system to do that and do it properly so we have, again, stable, long-term solution to this problem. One of the things that's driven the cost to the taxpayers up is the ambulance fees. Remember, we were in government, we introduced the ambulance fee program with a ceiling of $85 on a call. You get an insurance call now, my understanding is it's $600. That's a substantial increase. That's a cost that the insurance companies have to bear now, that before it was covered by the province. Another case of downloading and costs that have gone to individual people in lots of cases don't have the funds to pay the $600 if their insurance company indeed, or if they're in an accident with a non-insured driver. You look also at the issue of car injuries and the soft tissue injuries that are being talked about, and a compensation maximum of $2,500 for broken bones, minor soft tissue injury, whiplash, post-trauma stress. And these will all be considered as minor injuries. And that's a very concern. I belong to an organization called North American Chronic Pain Association of Canada, and most of the people that are on that have difficulties with long-term pain are things that cannot be medically diagnosed in a regular fashion. And if this $2,500 cap is on individuals like that, what it's going to mean, people are going to lose their homes again, they're going to lose all their assets, and through no fault of their own, be forced to go on the community service system, which we do not want in this province. That would just add more costs to the taxpayers of the province and definitely not help the overall situation. You know, people have to be reasonably compensated for their injury. Now, there's always talk about people that abuse the system, but I can tell you I work with a lot of people that have had injuries as a result of car accidents or work-related injuries. And I can say that most of these people aren't faking these injuries. They would rather be working, especially when they see their home being sold, or they have to sell their home because they can't afford to keep the payments up on the home, can't maintain the home if they happen to own it, and see it go to a condition that's almost unbearable to live in, with no assistance to do that. So we have to make sure that the compensation system set up for this is done properly so this situation doesn't happen in Nova Scotia. We have too many things that need to be changed in this bill to give it the long-term, stable rates with fair compensation for injuries that are a result of an accident. It's so important to make sure that Nova Scotians are properly protected, and protected at a price that we can afford as Nova Scotians. I don't mean the individual person alone that pays the insurance bill. I mean Nova Scotians as a whole. So if a claim goes in and a person loses their home and they have to go because the compensation isn't properly put together into social services, what's the cost? Maybe with a family of three, maybe $1,000, $1,400 a month for now until dear knows when indeed a proper system through the insurance program may prevent that being a burden on the taxpayers. So again, the real purpose here, as I see it, is long-term stable rates. You look at our telephone rates, and our power rates have been long-term and stable with a proper regulatory system in place. And there's some issues in the regulatory process that have been suggested in this bill, I think, that have to be addressed. And I look forward to the debate that will continue on this in the next readings of the bill. And I truly encourage everyone in the province that can come in to law amendments, state their cases, give us examples of things that you've run into in the present system and things you're concerned about in the future system that's being proposed here today by the government. And hopefully we can come up with a bill that'll do both provide proper protection for people and provide a reasonable cost on a long-term basis. These are the things we really have to aim for. And I feel if we can achieve those things with this bill, and we're going to introduce amendments to the bill to try and ensure that that happens, then we will have achieved the purpose we all should be here for: a better cost and affordable for all Nova Scotians. And it's been suggested all kinds of different things. We see that there's been difficulties in the past in publicly owned operating systems. We've also seen recently some problems with the privately operated systems. I think we have to have a system here, again, that's fair, affordable, and one we know we can rely on as time goes on. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence, and look forward to further debate on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's with particular honor that I take my place to have some comments on Bill number 1, and I think it's also important to recognize that you're in the chair. I congratulate you on your selection. And you know, Mr. Speaker, there's some advantages to having you in the chair, aside from the fairness and the objectivity that I know you will render in your decisions. I know that you, of course, from the chair, have the opportunity to interrupt me on any cause, and you probably during the next few moments will have an opportunity to correct me or bring me back on the topic. But there's also an advantage, because if you're not in your regular place, I won't have some of the real interruptions that you're famous for in this House. So congratulations on your selection as Deputy Speaker. And I would also like, on the topic congratulations, I'd like to congratulate my young friend from Sackville-Cobequid. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that one of the accomplishments I've had in this House is that, and perhaps in this party, in the last provincial election, there were 3 of my past students who ran for election. And although 2 of them were not successful, the MLA for Sackville-Cobequid is a graduate of Sackville High School. He has seen firsthand, he probably appreciates more than many other members of the House, the few strengths that I have and the multitude of weaknesses. So I think it's of real significance to congratulate the new members, and I heard the member from Preston speaking earlier, and this is an opportunity which I hope all members in this House, new members of this House in particular, take the opportunity to get on their feet, to express what they heard during the summer election on the topic. Now, Mr. Speaker, as you well know in your riding, there were other issues. There are other issues that were brought up during our campaign. There were other issues of significance, some of a local nature, some that, of course, perhaps we can always say are federal or municipal or whatever else of a local issue. But, Mr. Speaker, the issue in Timberley Prospect was auto insurance. It was the issue. So I've heard the members of the third party, Mr. Speaker, members of the Liberal Party, I've heard the members of the Liberal Party stand in their place and go on about what's happened in Prince Edward Island and Mr. Robichaud's unfortunate circumstances in his riding in Wilmot. And Gary Robichaud is a fine, fine leader of the NDP. I heard today again about comments about the results from Ontario and what had happened to Mr. Hampton in that situation. I am aware of the fact that that's part of what we are in this business, and it is a business, Mr. Speaker. It's a serious business that we look at how our political opponents do in other ridings or in other parts of the country. But, Mr. Speaker, I want you to know what's important to me is the 5,053 voters in Timberley Prospect that voted NDP in the last election. That's the significant number for me. And you know, we always have an aim, Mr. Speaker, and I want you to know that my aim in the last election, of course, was to return to this historic chamber, but to challenge the member from Cape Breton South on getting more than 5,000 votes. And I want you to know the member from Cape Breton South has nudged me out again. The member from Cape Breton South, I believe, if I have the totals correct, I could be corrected on this, I believe his number of total votes was 5,059. And, you know, I know the member from Cape Breton South's priority is on those 5,000 plus voters and what they said to him on the doorsteps in Cape Breton South throughout the constituency that he represents. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm going to take the opportunity during the next few moments. I'm going to bring up what I heard during the summer campaign on the issue, and of course, the issue was none other than car insurance. You know, there are certain expressions which are used by people in my constituency, and they would be described by you, Mr. Speaker, as unparliamentary language. So I might have to substitute for them on the topic of car insurance. But the best comment that was brought to my attention at any time on this topic during the summer campaign when it comes to car insurance would come from Reg Knight in Lower Prospect. And Reg said to me, somebody has got to grab those insurance companies right by the, and for Mr. Knight's comment, I'll stop there. And I would say, I will substitute for Reg by the throat. Because Mr. Knight is of the firm opinion, an opinion that's shared by many Nova Scotians, that the insurance companies in this country and in this province have to be brought under control. Somebody has to grab them by the throat. And it would seem to me that this piece of legislation fails miserably in doing that. It fails miserably. Insurance companies in this country and in this province have to be brought under control. They have to be grabbed by the throat. And it would be remiss on my part, Mr. Speaker, if I did not take the opportunity to remind you, and I know the member from Lunenburg, of course, always loves to get a history lesson, but I'd like to remind new members and the member from Lunenburg of some salient facts. Because this issue was brought to the floor of this legislature by the New Democratic Party and by our leader. And it was brought here during the spring session where we had the opportunity to bring to the floor of this House day after day, hour after hour, and question period after question period, examples of people across this province who had concerns about insurance. And Mr. Speaker, for the new members that are here, I'd like to refresh their memory. And I know the member from Lunenburg will be concerned about the fact that he knows that many of the people who were in the gallery, many of the examples that were brought to the floor of this House by our leader and by other members, by the member from Halifax Fairview, by the member from Cape Breton Centre, and yes, by myself, were constituents of mine from Timberley Prospect. And you know, the example that came first, because, you know, was there a problem in the insurance business? Was it going to be addressed? Well, when you address these problems, the key concern that you have is you have to have real people, real Nova Scotians who've got real situations that they are going to bring to legislators' attention. And the first one that jumped out was the case of Robert Butler, who lives down the Prospect Road. And for members in the House, let's just refresh you on who Robert Butler is. Robert Butler owned a van. He owned the van, and it was his method of transportation to and from his place of work and eventually his place of study at the community college. But Robert wanted to spruce up his van a little bit. Robert Butler was a student of mine, but not an art student. Robert Butler decided that he was going to put tiger stripes on his van. And it was a nice job, particularly when you look at the tiger stripes were orange and black. Now, I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, those are great colors, whether they're on the van or whether they're on an election sign. Robert Butler, quote unquote, according to his insurance company, customized his van. And I know the member from Dartmouth South remembers that. I know the members from various who are new members to the House remembered this situation. Because for one reason or another, his van suddenly was souped up and customized, and because of that, the insurance companies were going to jack his rates. He did nothing more to this van, nothing at all. But because he put tiger stripes on his van, there was one of the first examples of insurance companies in this province who were allowed just to do willy-nilly whatever they wanted to do. And people began to say, that's unfair. And I want you to know that the leader of the opposition and myself and the member from Halifax Fairview had the opportunity not just to meet Robert, but to meet some other students. And we went onto the campus of St. Mary's University, Mr. Speaker. And I must tell you, it was like, maybe I could say, a school reunion. Because as a school teacher, it is tremendously rewarding to be able to see the young men and women that you've had in the school system as they've progressed and moved on, as they've gone on to further studies. And I remember, and I know the members who were present from our caucus that went to this meeting at St. Mary's were approached by a young man named Tony Roding. Now let me tell you, I remember Tony Roding. Talented young man. I know the member from Dartmouth North is aware of who the Rodings are and where they live in Brookside. And when I came into the meeting, the students were seated, and I guess maybe, Mr. Speaker, out of a degree of respect, a number of the students that I had in school who were enrolled at Dalhousie or enrolled at St. Mary's who came to this meeting stood to greet me. In fact, Mr. Speaker, and I know the member from Cape Breton Centre will probably have a comment that you'll have to roll out of order, when they actually called me sir. Now, out of respect, I suddenly had this big, well-groomed, tall Tony Roding in front of me. Tony's comments were this: "Sir, thanks for listening to us about our problem with an insurance." Now, Tony Roding made a decision, Mr. Speaker. As a student at St. Mary's, he did not want to have to take care of residence fees. He did not want to have, because it would be his parents in this situation, paying for rent in a shared apartment. Tony Roding instead wanted a vehicle. He wanted a vehicle, a clunker, a beater. Those are the expressions that are used these days, Mr. Speaker, by these young men and women. Something that they can put on the road and get from home into their place of study or their place of work. And Tony Roding had made that decision with his family's input: live at home, get a car, and we'll see what the insurance costs. Now, Mr. Speaker, you heard the member from Cape Breton, you heard the member from Sackville-Cobequid bring forth the example of when he bought an $800 car and the insurance was $1,600. And he said that wasn't yesterday. Well, we've got an example of just this recent spring where we have young people in communities around this province, especially young men, who are paying insurance rates on vehicles that are entirely unacceptable and have been discriminated against because of their age and because of the fact that they happen to be male. Now, we are well aware, Mr. Speaker, that when you are, after all, in an accident, you expect your insurance, and it is your fault, you expect your insurance rates to increase. But why would a student going to university, living at home, have to pay as much as $3,000, $3,200 on car insurance for a vehicle that didn't cost him $1,000? Something had to be done. The students that day had the opportunity, and it was a very good opportunity for us as legislators to listen firsthand to the concerns of these university students in post-secondary institutions here in Metro. And I know that members from Cape Breton have heard of some of the same stories. I know that the member from Cape Breton Nova that's trying to get this light system improved as it comes down off Kites Hill here. I know he's concerned about that problem because that's one of the roads into UCCB. And there are many, many, many students across this province who took the opportunity to bring these concerns to our attention. But it wasn't just students, and I hope members opposite remember some of these names, because I also want you to know we had the opportunity to speak about Shirley and Tom Phobin of Lake Road in Hatchet Lake. And yes, Mr. Speaker, those are other constituents of mine that had concerns about insurance. Seniors this time. Seniors who were discriminated against because of the insurance policies that have been allowed to just go ahead with whatever they want in this province. So, you know, the expression is in Cape Breton, and the member from Cape Breton Centre said I could try this, and you're going to rule me out of order. You know, the system is broke. I think he would say the arse is out of it. The system, Mr. Speaker, is broke.
Order, please. I believe the honourable member for Sackville Timberley Prospect knows the use of the word that he just attended to is unparliamentary, and I would ask if he could, well, it is now. And I would ask if the honourable member would choose another form of words. And I would also remind members that perhaps the tone of other conversations is getting a bit loud in here, and perhaps if you need to carry on private conversations, carry them outside. Thank you.
I take the guidance of the Speaker, and I point out to you, I removed that comment, that certainly the system is broke, and I can tell you that'll be the last time that I will accept the advice of the member from Cape Breton Centre when it comes to any kind of parliamentary language. There's a hole in the system, Mr. Speaker, and it's time to repair it because, let's face it, this bill tinkers with the system that is clearly broken. It's broken because of what happened to the Phobins. It's broken because of what happened to Tony Roding. It's broken because of what happened to Robert Butler. And you know, if you've got something that is in such bad shape, you don't apply a Band-Aid, you fix it. Major surgery is needed. Major surgery is needed when it comes to a correction of the insurance system. And you know, I received in my mailbox at the caucus office today another notice from Mr. Forgeron. I know, you know, Mr. Forgeron either believes that I don't get it, or he has to continually send me an harangue against the NDP constantly because of what we are proposing. But Mr. Forgeron, get it clear. The people of Nova Scotia think the system is broken. It is broken. The insurance system in this province is broken. So when you look at some of these well-placed ads that we see, and Mr. Speaker, I will table this.
Paid for by the consumer.
Paid for by Nova Scotia's auto insurance. There are solutions. There are solutions. And then, of course, we look at what he recommends, or I would assume Mr. Forgeron's hand or the government's hand is on this full-page ad. And I'll table this as soon as I read this section right here. New legislation required. Insurers provide car insurance within a strict framework of provincial laws. We look to legislatures to change those laws. By doing so, they will stabilize premiums and return our industry to health and permit us to serve our customers in an environment of competition and choice. Now, Mr. Forgeron, we get it. I understand where you're coming from. You, after all, are the talking head of what you want, the status quo. And this bill, in so many ways, delivers that and nothing more. So what do I say to Tony Rhodey? His insurance rates jumped by 65%. 65%. This legislation says 20%. I was a history teacher, Mr. Speaker, as you well know. 20% and 65% says to me that 45% is allowed. 45. There's nothing wrong with a 45% increase. Nothing wrong with it. We are going to give 20% reductions. But for those people who have had to, over the last number of years, pay these increased rates of whatever percent, 20% doesn't help that young man. It doesn't help seniors across this province. It doesn't fix the problem under any circumstances. And members opposite and the members of the Liberal Party should be well aware of that particular piece of evidence. You see, the thing, Mr. Speaker, is the NDP is on the side of Nova Scotians on this issue. We're not on the side of the insurance companies. We're not apologizing for anyone. I challenge the members of the Liberal and the Conservative Party. Look who makes the donations to your parties. Look who's making those big donations. And when the tune is played, we know who's calling the music. I think the member from Inverness would understand that one. You pay the piper, well, who's choosing the tune? Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, the insurance companies of Canada, the insurance companies of Nova Scotia have to be brought under control, and this piece of legislation just doesn't do it, Mr. Speaker. It just doesn't do it. Mr. Speaker, I know that you and your place have stood and expressed your points of view about what you heard during the campaign. And let me tell you, I want members opposite to stand and I want them to have their say too. Because I will say that those 5,000 plus voters in my growing constituency that voted for me, they knew that we would continue the fight for government-owned, driver-owned insurance in this province. And I have heard from constituents who know that this debate is going on. I have listened to those people on the doorsteps. I continue to receive emails, although you should know, Mr. Speaker, my office, unfortunately, is in an HRM building, and some of those emails haven't been addressed in the last few days because of circumstances with Hurricane Juan. But let me tell you, the people who voted for this NDP MLA, they want us to continue to press for the insurance system that we have told them about, the insurance system in other provinces in this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you've seen that information, and as an open-minded member of this legislature, I know that you have listened to...
Order, please. Order, please. I would ask all members in the chamber, please afford the member for Timberley Prospect the courtesy of his time on the floor, and perhaps keep the tone of conversations down.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know members opposite and the members of the Liberal Party are listening to these points of view, so it's of some consequence to bring them forth again so that they will be made very clearly aware of what has been happening in the crisis when it comes to insurers across this province. Now, we can look at other provinces. That's an example that's used. And when we bring up Manitoba and its flat roads, I know the member for skyrocketing insurance has points of view and various comments. I've heard people point to what the Premier of British Columbia has done, the Liberal Premier of British Columbia has done. But I again come back to the issue at hand, Mr. Speaker. We are talking about what's best for Nova Scotians. Now, as a native New Brunswicker, I on occasion pay visits to my home. My home is, after all, part of the riding of Tantramar that was represented by a New Democrat for a number of years. I've had the opportunity to receive information from the people in Tantramar, which of course is the constituency on the border, which represents Cape Tormentine, Sackville, and of course the legendary community of Dorchester. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, the comments are this, and it's important to bring to this legislature's attention that the MLA for St. John, the leader of the NDP, is currently looking into the insurance problem in Nova Scotia. And that leader of the NDP, New Brunswick, excuse me. Where was I? Nova Scotia. I noticed the member from Cole Harbour looked at me quickly, right? I appreciate the correction. It won't be my last mistake during the next 50 minutes when I speak here. It's of real consequence to notice who the Premier of New Brunswick turned to. The Premier of New Brunswick turned to the leader of the NDP. Turned to the leader of the NDP and said, find out what's best here. Find out what's best. Now, maybe that's some politics involved. Let's look at the situation in New Brunswick. In New Brunswick, where after all, the leader of the NDP has a very important vote in just about any issue that comes up on the floor. And I'm sure that she is going to do an excellent job. Open-minded that she will, review what's been there, and the unfortunate thing will always come back to this, Mr. Speaker. You know, in this business, in 6 months' time, I don't want to be standing in this legislature. I don't want to be standing in this legislature debating another insurance bill. But, Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, maybe history will prove me wrong, but I will have the opportunity in this legislature to say to the members opposite, to say to the members of the third party, I told you so. Or we told you so. We told you so. That tinkering with the system and this particular Bill 1 is not going to solve the problems of the insurance industry in this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's, after all, the issue that's of some consequence. That's the issue where there has to be some open-mindedness here. We should be looking very clearly, and the member from Hanseas brought forth today in his speech a number of details about what is going on in other provinces. And yes, Mr. Speaker, those were or currently are provinces that have had a government-owned system set up by the NDP. Heaven forbid they're at the door. The socialist hordes are taking over. Well, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians no longer have us at the door. They have us in this historic legislature. They have us in these numbers in this House. And the reason we are here, Mr. Speaker, is because we very clearly during that summer campaign were delivered a mandate on August 5th that we are to continue to push and press and see if the decision makers in this province, the 52 MLAs who sit here in this historic chamber, would be open-minded enough to look very clearly that what will be the solution, what will be one of the best and final solutions for the insurance problems in this province and in this country from one jurisdiction to the other. The answer is a government-owned, driver-owned insurance system. That's the mandate that we've been given, and that is how we are going to respond. Mr. Speaker, what we need is an automobile insurance system in Nova Scotia that delivers the lowest, fairest rates. Now, I had the opportunity to deliver by hand across my constituency a fabulous piece of legislation. Aside from the fact that the leader of the NDP's picture was on it, it was one of the most colorful, attractive things that has ever been delivered. And you know, I would suggest that in future, and I know the member from Cape Breton Centre is aware of this, that when it comes to hair design studios in my constituency, there probably would be no one better to prepare any leader or any MLA for a document that goes across your constituency than to go to that particular finishing touch hair design in Timberley. But because that piece of legislation, with the picture of the leader of the NDP, with the breakdown of that Honda, help me, Accord. That's what it is when you drive a Dodge Sport truck. that Honda Accord and how you could license a Honda or how you can insure a Honda Accord in different jurisdictions in different provinces across this country. That piece of legislation is still, or that piece of important insurance information is still used in this legislature. It is still used in homes throughout the constituency of Timberley Prospect. People refer to it when they look at the advantages of a state-run, government-owned, driver-owned insurance system. And I want you to know I've been in homes, Mr. Speaker. I've been in homes where it is on the fridge. And it's not only on the fridge, it's held on the fridge by an NDP vote, Bill Esterbrooks, MLA, Timberley Prospect magnet. That, after all, Mr. Speaker, is an endorsement of a piece of information that Nova Scotians wanted to receive, a piece of information they consider important, a piece of information that they need to know the details of, and they continually refer to it. Because the voters in Timberley Prospect are open-minded when it comes to listening to the advantages of the type of insurance system that we have recommended. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are not alone. I don't consider myself alone in this particular task of convincing Nova Scotians. I'd like to refer, and I will table, but just give me a moment because I'm going to use it for a couple of comments. I would like to table from the Friday, August the 22nd, 2003 Daily News Perspective. And I also want you to note that August the 22nd, that particular Friday, was the birthday of the member from Cape Breton Nova. So he had dual reasons to celebrate when that came forward that day. I know that he probably was 29 for the 30th year again, but on that day in that paper, Rick Howe, who is, in my view, one of the responsible journalists in the HRM, and if you are able to pick up across this province, his Hotline show, Rick Howe, as a columnist in the Daily News, wrote these particular things. Resistance is futile, writes Mr. Howe. Public auto insurance is the only way to go. So let's do it. And I'm going to refer to a couple of points in this, and then I will give it to one of the pages here in a moment. In his comments, Mr. Howe writes, Ham, referring to Mr. Premier, Ham could do us all a favor now and cast aside his claims. His plan is actually better than his next-door counterparts, so therefore it will work. Sorry, Mr. Premier, but let's admit it. The insurance industry is interested only in making as much money as it can for its Ontario or international masters. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Howe hits it on the head. Mr. Howe, in this well-written article, and I hope that members opposite take the opportunity to read what was written that day. And, you know, those particular points of view, and you know, the Hotline program is a program that I know when the House isn't sitting and when I have the opportunity, and I'm in my constituency, as we are all over our constituency, morning after morning after morning, I must tell you that from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, I listen when the opportunity is there to the Hotline program, because I hear from Nova Scotians who have concerns about the issue that has been brought forward on that day. And during those debates and during those comments that we heard on the Rick Howe show at various times, car insurance, Mr. Speaker, was a popular topic. It was a popular topic that was brought up day after day after day, no matter who Mr. Howe had as guests. When his callers came forth with comments, they were horror stories that they were bringing to the attention of other Nova Scotians. And I know, you know, members of this House could say, they're only NDPers that call Rick Howe's show. I don't think so. In fact, I'm quite sure that the member from Eastern Shore knows that there's members from his riding that call that particular show and express points of view from his riding. I know that Metro members, whether it's the member from Chester St. Margaret's or whether it's the member from Bedford, or whether we've heard other concerns brought forward. I know we have some municipal councillors here. And in fact, I've known some of these municipal councillors are regular and consistent listeners to Mr. Howe, because the people who are calling there, whether they're from Clayton Park or whether they're from Timberley, they bring forward concerns that we as elected officials at whatever level have to listen to. And Mr. Howe, as a columnist in the Daily News, in the weekly column that he usually produces, it's a wrap-up of the week and what he's heard. So you read his comments, you've heard what I've put into the record again, and it would seem to me that that is the very sort of information that Nova Scotians want me to bring to the floor of this legislature. When we have journalists who are willing to come out and say, have a very long look at what's done in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, and you know what could be done in Nova Scotia. Now, and I know the member from Dartmouth North has brought this to my attention before, it's not just Nova Scotia. I'm aware of the fact that other premiers, and I'm not sure where Premier Binns is now, and I congratulate Premier Binns on his re-election, as I do young Robert Giz on his election to the PEI legislature. Hopefully I'll have the opportunity over the Thanksgiving weekend to pass those comments on to Mr. Giz personally. And of course, as you know, Mr. Speaker, he is the son of legendary Premier Joe Giz, and I look forward to what Robert is going to bring forth with regards to legislation when it comes to ideas about public auto insurance. Because it would seem to me that one of the options, and I've heard members of these parties say, we can't go alone on this. But when we look at what has been said on occasion by Mr. Binns, you know, Mr. Binns, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Binns said during the election, you know, perhaps we could look at some kind of regional service. Perhaps we could look at something that if we look at a public auto service, because we don't have the numbers and we don't have the size in Prince Edward Island, perhaps we could look at some kind of combined public auto service. That says to me that the re-elected Premier of Prince Edward Island is being open-minded about this. And considering the situation in New Brunswick and the result of their election, maybe the young Tory Premier of New Brunswick, Mr. Lord, learned something, aside from a little humility, which he needed a big dose of, incidentally, Mr. Speaker. Maybe Mr. Lord has understood the fact that you can't run away from this issue on insurance. This issue is here to stay. And applying a Band-Aid to it, I mean, we know the examples of what happened in New Brunswick. My friends from Tantramar bring it to my attention all the time. It hasn't worked. So has this government learned anything from the experience in New Brunswick? After all, we have to be open-minded as legislators. One particular party does not have a patent on all the good ideas. And at times we should be looking at the fact that there are ideas in other jurisdictions that have worked for a long time, and that they have benefited consumers, they have benefited other Canadians in other provincial jurisdictions, and we should be open-minded to the advantages of ideas from other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, I can bring examples to your attention. You have heard them before, whether it's coastal assessments and how other provinces handle situations, whether it's natural resources, and from your previous experience, whether, of course, it's in the matter of the protection of workers and labor. There is all kinds of legislation that we should follow from other jurisdictions. And here is an example of one that we should be following. This is an example of one when it comes to public auto insurance that, after all, does make sense. Because to reiterate what Mr. Howe said, private insurers are concerned about the bottom line. They're concerned about the profit margin. There's nothing wrong with making profits. So I don't expect the members of the Liberal Party to get up and begin to harangue me, although they're paying very good attention today. I'm pleased with that. I don't expect them to get up and harangue me about socialist dogma and that we're going to destroy every business. That's, after all, let's look at it. Private insurers have had exorbitant profits in the second quarter of 2003. So why should Nova Scotians not get a share of those profits? Let's look at what makes sense here. Nova Scotians have paid the bills. It's the same thing that happens every time when it comes to an insurance situation. We get all these excuses. Oh, we don't cover this and we don't cover that. Oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. But you pay your premium or time or you're in the facility. And that's the way it works. That no longer can be allowed in this province. That no longer can be permitted. As Reg Knight has said before, it's time that somebody in this province grabs the insurance companies by the throat. And this is the time to do it. This particular bill just doesn't do justice to that mandate that was given to me by Reg, who lives in Lower Prospect. I heard the member from Coal Harbour Eastern Passage begin to talk about the capping of benefits. Now, Mr. Speaker, this particular piece of legislation doesn't do anything about capping benefits. It goes on about kneecapping Nova Scotians. Kneecapping them, punishing them, hurting them. We are not taking care of Nova Scotians by capping benefits in this way. We are certainly not taking care of Nova Scotians by this particular definition of injuries. The members of the Liberal Party, the members of my caucus have brought forward example after example. That particular clause, and I know I shouldn't refer to clause by clause, Mr. Speaker, but that is a flaw that must be addressed. That is a flaw that is short-sighted, in my opinion. It's limited, and it is not, after all, to the benefit of Nova Scotians. And after all, that's why we're here. We are here to listen to Nova Scotians, to bring forth legislation that, after all, will be as positive as we can possibly deliver to this House. Those improvements must be forthcoming. And I want you to know that this caucus looks forward to the law amendments process, Mr. Speaker. It's a process that new members of this House should take the opportunity to be involved in. And when this piece of legislation, as it inevitably will, move out of this historic chamber and down the hall to the Red Room, I encourage Nova Scotians. I encourage the listeners to Rick Howe's program. I encourage average Nova Scotians, students, to come forward and sit for a few moments with us. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's of real importance that Nova Scotians understand, and I think you had the opportunity to see two of the fishermen from my community who were here a couple of days ago. People are not used to coming to the Nova Scotia legislature. They are not used to the historic trappings. They are not used to, after all, what maybe I don't, and I know you don't, Mr. Speaker, take our positions for granted. But let me tell you, I encourage Nova Scotians to come here, to go to law amendments. It's not a formal. They don't have to have a speech. They have the opportunity, as you know, Mr. Speaker, to sit, and there are microphones there, to give themselves the opportunity to speak for, well, I don't know what the time limits are going to be this time. The Attorney General and the Minister of Justice, as the chair of law amendments, should say 15 minutes per presentation. More importantly, during that law amendments process, not to talk for the entire amount of time, but to allow us as legislators, to allow us as members of the committee. And I've seen the committee structure for law amendments. Anybody who's new to this House should know, based on previous experience with minority governments, law amendments is going to work this time. Law amendments is going to work because the opposition has to be listened to. No longer can the government just say, that's enough, we're taking it back to the House. Because that's the opportunity for us as legislators to sit and listen to Nova Scotians, and then more importantly, to have the opportunity, as the chair recognizes us, for a few questions. Now, for the new members, you should know, you're only allowed that 15-minute time limit, if that's the time limit this time. 15-minute time limit, because then, of course, we have to move on to other presenters. And I know we're going to hear from Mr. Forgeron, and I'm sure I'll have PowerPoint presentations, and I'm sure that there will be overheads and there will be all kinds of material. And I'm looking forward to talking to Mr. Forgeron and having an opportunity to ask him a few questions. But it's not the Don Forgerons that we want to hear from at law amendments. We want to hear from Nova Scotians. So they come in and get their pass. They have the chance to speak. They can request their time if it's advisable, and I would assume, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have lots of people, so I would assume we'll be doing this in the evenings. I would assume this piece of legislation is going to attract a lot of attention from Nova Scotians, and it will be an opportunity for all members of this House. And I encourage in particular, Mr. Speaker, I know you've been on law amendments. I've seen you sit in those chairs in there. I encourage the members of the government to participate, to ask a question, to say, why would you think this? Can you explain that to me? Because after all, out of courtesy, Mr. Speaker, when Bill 1 comes forward at this time, there will be plenty of questions. And I would assume that this caucus, along with the members of the third party, will bring amendments forward. We are prepared to do that. We are prepared to bring amendments forward. If this government is willingly open-minded to look at some of these amendments, we are prepared to look at what can come out of law amendments. And I'll tell you what will come out of there. These government members opposite will go, my, did we ever catch some heat in there? Boy, Nova Scotians are still upset, and Bill 1 doesn't solve the problem. Bill 1 doesn't have the answers. Nova Scotians don't think that just this piece of legislation is going to fix the system. It's going to fix the hole that's in the system. It's going to make sure that the system is fair to Nova Scotians. And that law amendments procedure and that process in this House, Mr. Speaker, as you well know from your experience visiting other legislatures, is an absolutely unique and historic thing in this House. It's a wonderful opportunity for Nova Scotians to have their say. Everything that they say, of course, is recorded, and the opportunity is there for them to put on the record the concerns. But the give and take of minority government, will work at law amendments, because in law amendments, we will see firsthand what has happened across this province during the summer election. We will also have the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to listen to Nova Scotians about their concerns. You know, it's not the public relations campaign, it's not the journalists, it's not the columnists in the print media, it's average Nova Scotians that we were elected by. Ordinary Nova Scotians, whatever that means. Thank God we no longer use that term, because I don't consider myself representing any ordinary Nova Scotians. I consider myself representing extraordinary Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians who took the opportunity in the middle of a summer campaign, who took the opportunity on that particular Tuesday to go out and put their X next to one of our names. And in the constituency that I represent, the 5,053 people that voted for this NDP MLA voted for me because we were supporting and I was speaking to and listening to Nova Scotians on the doorstep about a government-owned insurance policy on the model that we had presented to them and that mail-out that we have delivered all across Nova Scotia. That mail-out that showed the Honda Accord and that showed the different legislations and how dollars could be affected from one to the other. Now, the opportunity is here, Mr. Speaker. The opportunity is here to listen to Nova Scotians, to make sure that we have the best possible piece of legislation. The best possible piece of legislation is a piece of legislation that is brought forward by a legislature based upon open-minded give and take of minority government. To just dismiss government-owned car insurance, to just dismiss it with the idea being of, it doesn't work, it costs too much, it's not the way to go, to apply a Band-Aid to a severely wounded, mortally wounded system such as the insurance system in this province.
Would the honourable member yield the floor in favor of a ministerial statement, and then we can return back to the members' time?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to make an announcement to the House and to Nova Scotians about the provincial government's continuing effort to help people in the areas that have been affected or are still being affected by Hurricane Juan, particularly those still dealing with power outages. As we know, many Nova Scotians have had their electricity returned, although some are still waiting for the resumption of power. In order to help people in the hurricane-affected areas, as they clean up, make repairs to their homes, and restock their food supplies, retail stores in Nova Scotia that normally would be required to be closed this Sunday, October the 5th, will be permitted to be open. This is intended to allow retailers to assist their friends and neighbors with their recovery efforts to serve their communities. Although this exemption applies province-wide, we expect that only retailers serving areas affected by the hurricane to be open. We will trust in the good judgment of store owners and operators to make that decision. My department is requesting the cooperation of police agencies throughout Nova Scotia, asking them not to lay charges under the Retail Business Uniform Closing Day Act with respect to this Sunday, October the 5th. If for some reason charges are laid, I will issue a directive to the Public Prosecution Service ordering them to stay the prosecution. I want to stress that this provision applies to this Sunday only and is in response to the extraordinary circumstances in which we find ourselves. It is intended to help Nova Scotians with their recovery efforts to make available to them food and other essentials in a timely and appropriate fashion. Nova Scotians have shown, again, their determination and capacity to help their neighbors. We trust this measure will help them to do just that under these very difficult circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have a moment to respond to the Minister of Justice's statement. I just received it, and I appreciate receiving it in advance. As one of those people still without power and water, I was thinking today, if I don't get my power till tomorrow, how would I be able to restock my fridge? I was thinking to myself, well, wouldn't Sunday shopping be a benefit right now? So I can say on behalf of a lot of people who still do not have power, this is a very good measure. I'm glad to see it has happened. It is one that I think a lot of Nova Scotians will appreciate an opportunity, particularly if their power is only coming on in the next day or so, or they have equipment they have to purchase or rent. This is a good opportunity for them to do that. And I would suggest that depending on how things are working, the government may want to think about the next Sunday depending on exactly how bad things are. But at least this does give an opportunity for people to do some of those things they would normally do on a Saturday, which they may not be able to do, whether they're in a community that is still without power or they're individuals without power. This is a good opportunity to address that. And we on this side of the House are glad to see it. And hopefully it will be a good opportunity and there won't be any problems arising from it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to rise on this occasion to respond to the Minister's statement and to congratulate the Minister for taking this step. I take this as a signal of the way that minority governments should and can work. Most of the members in the House will realize that earlier this morning, our party put out a request to the government to do exactly what they've done in these circumstances. And we see this as a wise step in the right direction, and a small step nonetheless toward the direction that we ultimately want to go in, but clearly a recognition that in these circumstances we are in an emergency. And for many people in Nova Scotia, and like the Honourable Leader, House Leader for the NDP who is without power, I share those circumstances and look forward to the opportunity perhaps on Sunday to get out and to stock the fridges and the freezers and make sure that life returns to normal, assuming that the electricity is back on. So congratulations to the government, and I feel that this is a good sign of how minority governments can and should work.
Thank you. Now we will return to Bill number 1, and I recognize the honourable member for Timberley Prospect. He has approximately about 12 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, I would like to pass on my compliments to the members of the Liberal Party and to the government for a very wise idea. I know it'll be very much received in the community that I represent. It'll also be very well received by my partner for the past 30 years, who has commitments on Saturday, and then now Sunday we'll be able to go and do our shopping together. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring this together, and I know that members opposite and member from Lunenburg in particular, of course, doesn't need a history lesson, but I think it's about appropriate time that I table this particular piece, this wonderful, and give me a moment, if I may, the page, this wonderful particular piece of election material. And you know, I think that the member from Dartmouth North, of course, is the famous member who has tabled that blue book so many times. And you know, I know that as I reach down in my desk here, I don't want to use my back too strong, or I wouldn't be able to table this particular waste of paper that was received all across this province, and for which we lost a lot of good trees on a piece of propaganda of no use at all. John Ham's blueprint for building a better Nova Scotia. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, that I was knocking on doors in Greenwood Heights the day the men and women were delivering those things. They were disgusted. They had them in the back of their trucks, and they said, you know, Mr. Speaker, our concern, you know what our concern's going to be? We'll put them in the mailboxes today, and tomorrow they'll be in the garbage beside those mailboxes all through suburban Timberland. And let me tell you, the next day as I finished off that canvas up Brentwood Avenue, sure enough, that particular waste of good trees in this province was laying everywhere. People were offended by what was called the Encyclopedia of Answers with no real questions ever been asked. People do not want, in an election, to have to put up with nonsense such as that. I mean, we are talking about a particular piece of legislation here, Mr. Speaker, a piece of legislation that's based upon 7 key commitments. And the first commitment should be read into the record. That's the commitment, and I see some members who've come back. I see the member from Yarmouth, and I know the member from Yarmouth in particular will stand in his place, and he will explain why he received the number of votes that he received in Yarmouth, so that when he goes back there and he has the opportunity to say, I am going to vote for Bill 1 for this reason, because of the number of thousands of people that voted for him. Now, the member from Yarmouth perhaps is aware of the fact that when you get the opportunity to be returned to this House, the work really begins then. Because during the first time, whether the member from Yarmouth will admit this or not, the first time you're in this House, the analogy might be incorrect, but it's a bit like a honeymoon. And now we're...
Is there any chance that the honourable member may come back to the principle of the bill here at some point?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And your wise judgment again has shown me that I should be corrected, because I know there's members of the third party on occasion would bring the same point up on points of order, but you've done it ahead of them. And I was just pointed out to the member from Yarmouth that when you receive that second mandate, you are truly answerable, because the honeymoon is over and it's time to pay attention to such important documents as I'm going to table here when it comes to Bill 1. And the first and most important commitment that was made by this MLA in Timberley Prospect, that was made on the doorsteps, that this commitment says we will ensure the lowest and fairest car insurance rates. I'm going to read this into the record, if I may, Mr. Speaker, and then I'll table it. It's only a few lines.
Well, order. On the provision, the honourable member is going to use it as a document to be referred to, and he can certainly quote from it, but as he well knows, being an experienced member in this House, he's drawing a fine line. He's starting to use it more of a prop than he is as a document to be referred to in supporting his position on the principle of Bill 1.
And again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your direction. I will not use it as a prop. I'll make no comments upon pictures that are used or hairstyles that should have been used, but I will enter this into the record, if my one good eye will get me through it. Nova Scotia's car insurance rates shot up by 65% in 1 year. The NDP plan will turn that trend around with the lowest, fairest rates for Nova Scotian drivers. Period. The Liberals' and Tories' answer is to take money from drivers' benefits and give it to big insurance companies. That plan has been tried in other provinces, and it only led to higher rates and lower benefits. Only the NDP's driver-owned nonprofit insurance plan, proven to have given drivers the lowest, fairest rates, 30 to 50% lower. That, after all, I would say, aside from the fact that I still contend this is a piece of legislation, this is a piece of important election information. I thought we had an older, taller page here for a moment. A piece of election information that's of real consequence to Nova Scotians. And I want the member from Yarmouth to know, this is where I'm coming from on this particular point. I have said, and it's important to understand, that it's not what's done in Manitoba, it's not what they're going through in New Brunswick, it's what the people in your constituency said to you during the election on this particular topic that should absolutely demand that you get to your feet and that you have your say. What did they say in Waverley? What did they say in Fall River? What did they say in Shelburne?
Order, please. The honourable member certainly knows. I mean, he's waxing some pretty good eloquence here, but he's not speaking to the principle of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate your guidance again. As I appreciate your direction, as I wrap up my comments, that's what I was doing. I followed the examples of previous MLAs when I learned from the MLA from Queens, Mr. Leaf, and I believe I'm allowed to use his name now that he's no longer a member. I learned from the MLA from Kings North, particularly Kings North when Mr. Archibald, and again, I believe I'm allowed to use his name, would point out what got them elected and what got them re-elected. And I challenge members opposite, and I know the members of the Liberal Party are standing in their place, speaking on what they heard during the summer election. I'll be proud to say to any one of the 5,053 residents of Timberley Prospect that voted NDP in Timberley Prospect, I will assure you, Mr. Speaker, that over the next few days and the next few months, the opportunity will be there. Those people will say, thank you, Bill, for continuing to push for a government-run, driver-owned auto insurance in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Are there any other interventions? I recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to speak on Bill 1. Mr. Speaker, the Insurance Act we see before us is a long time coming. Almost 2 years ago, the Liberal caucus called on all parties in this legislature to come together and work on a strategy to address the issues of raising auto insurance rates. At that time, both the New Democrats and the Tories didn't want to talk about insurance. They didn't recognize the problems that were beginning to grip Nova Scotia drivers. Since the time when we first recognized auto insurance as a problem in Nova Scotia, many things have happened.
I do hate to interrupt the honourable member for Digby Annapolis, but with the concurrence of the honourable member and other members of the House, if we could revert back to notices of motion. For a notice of motion that was introduced earlier, it seems there's a general agreement to re-examine one notice of motion. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I read this resolution on behalf of the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley. On a future day, Mr. Speaker, whereas the Pictou County Reserve Militia has volunteered to assist the Colchester County EMO, Town of Truro, Colchester County with cleanup caused by Hurricane Juan, and whereas the EMO made a request to have necessary troops approved, and whereas the Federal Department of Defense has the authority to approve this request, therefore be it resolved that the members of this members of this House, Nova Scotia Legislature, encourage the Department of National Defence to support this request to Colchester County so that residents of Colchester County and Truro can receive this much-needed help from volunteers, possibly from Pictou County. Mr. Speaker, I ask for your approval and consent. The House.
There's a request for a waiver of notice and passage without debate. Is that agreed? The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis and do appreciate his indulgence. Back on bill number 1. Oh yes, well we'll ask, before we go there, we ask for a vote that be approved. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary minded? The motion is carried. I recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis on bill number 1.
Since the time when we first recognized auto insurance as a problem in Nova Scotia, many things have happened. The government wandered aimlessly through the issue, promising action, but delivering only a freeze. The NDP, in the meantime, put on a roadshow with the objective of trying to find a justification for their government-run insurance plan. During this time, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal caucus was at work gathering information, talking to interest groups and consumers alike. The result was an insurance policy which I am proud to say was the first solution offered to Nova Scotians, and I'm also proud to say is the only policy which has not changed since the day we announced it. The election, Mr. Speaker, saw the Conservatives adopt a New Brunswick solution which was proven not to work. They promised Nova Scotians relief in the form of 20% average rate reduction. When the Tories were asked how the savings would be realized, they described a cap on minor injuries associated with aches and sprains. The definition we see in this bill is not what the government campaigned on in July and August. During the election, they spoke of a cap on minor injuries. When I think of a minor injury, I think of a minor whiplash or a sprained ankle. These are all injuries which are painful but not life-altering. What we see in this bill is truly alarming. First of all, it is taken from the New Brunswick Act. The definition put forward in New Brunswick, copied in Nova Scotia, is extremely broad and would cap the vast majority of injury claims, including some permanent injuries. As well, this cap also see people who suffer a serious but non-permanent injury capped at $2,500. We feel that victims will lose big time and end up costing society more than we realize. This is a gutting of the compensation system in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians pay for insurance so that when they are injured in a car accident, they can be reasonably compensated for their injury. This bill does not do that. Instead, what this bill does is reward the insurance companies for raising their premiums. Mr. Speaker, this is a theme we see from one end of this bill to another. From the definition where the payouts for so-called minor injuries are going to put millions of dollars into the pockets of insurance companies and take it directly out of the pockets of deserving injury victims, to the clawing of long-term disability funds, once again from the pockets of deserving injury victims into the deep pockets of insurance companies. As if this wasn't enough, Mr. Speaker, for the families of injured victims, the people who are staying at home trying to hold the households together, the government sees fit to take away any compensation these people were entitled to receive to help them through difficult times. Truly, we see some of the most vulnerable citizens targeted in this legislation. For who are the people who are going to be affected most, Mr. Speaker? It is the people in this province and the family members who sacrifice their own careers to stay at home and care for their loved ones. These are the people who the government say have no value, so therefore they should not be compensated for their work. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are hard-working people. They take pride in their work and go the extra mile to get that job done. For many, that means going to work on days when they are not feeling well, when perhaps the best thing they could have done is stayed home and used some of their allotted sick days. Because of this well-recognized work ethic, Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians have accumulated or banked a fair number of sick days. These are days that the employees pay for. They have invested their time and money so that if they need it, these days will be there. What this government sees when it looks at 6 days, Mr. Speaker, is not the reflection of hard-working society. Rather, they see an opportunity to put money back into the pockets of insurance industry. This bill, Mr. Speaker, will see an injured Nova Scotian have to exhaust their sick day reserve before they will see any money from an insurance company. An injured Nova Scotian is going to have to exhaust the time they have invested before this government thinks it is fair for an insurance company to have to compensate that injured person. Mr. Speaker, again, we see this government literally taking money out of the pockets of injured Nova Scotians and putting it into the pocket of the insurance company. In the last election, the Liberal Party put forward a plan that in the true spirit of liberalism struck a balance between protecting the rights of injured victims and guaranteeing relief for consumers from rapidly increasing insurance rates. We made a promise to Nova Scotians to limit our cap to pain and suffering component of soft tissue injuries. Mr. Speaker, it is interesting to note that the Conservatives during the last election also promised to cap only minor injuries. But now I am wondering just who is going to determine just what a minor injury is. Will it be the victim's family doctor, or does the insurance company use their own doctor? Or will the victims end up using their $2,500 for the courts to decide? Mr. Speaker, this government has sold Nova Scotians out to the insurance companies. They have proposed this in the bill to take deserved compensation out of the pockets of Nova Scotians and put it into the hands of an insurance company. This is not fair, Mr. Speaker, and it is a fundamental flaw in the legislature. Mr. Speaker, the NDP believes in a plan also, but I am not convinced that they should believe in a government-run insurance plan. First of all, there will be taxpayers in this province who don't own a car or even drive one who will be subsidizing this plan. We are talking about a plan that will cost this province hundreds of millions of dollars for startup alone. Mr. Speaker, this happened one time in our commercial fishing industry, where Nova Scotians were subsidizing the government plan for fishing boat insurance. The people who never owned boats demanded a stop to the subsidization, and when it was stopped, that plan went bankrupt. Mr. Speaker, in order to assume the cost of taking care of 61,000 claims annually in Nova Scotia and providing insurance to nearly 500,000 vehicles in the province, a government-run insurer would require financial support from government, including a very conservative estimate of $340 million in startup funds. Furthermore, the government would need to find other sources of revenue to make up for the loss of revenue from the licensing, registration, and taxes of private insurers. Mr. Speaker, we Liberals want this. Mr. Speaker, we Liberals want this bill to work for Nova Scotians. They need a break from high insurance costs, but they can't sacrifice fair insurance coverage for the sake of making insurance companies bigger profits. Mr. Speaker, we have lots of insurance problems in this province. We have people driving the roads without insurance because they just can't afford to have it. We have small businesses in this province that have no insurance right now because they've decided to take it off their businesses so they could keep their head above water. Mr. Speaker, amendments must be made to this bill in a fair way. The Liberal Party stands on the side of accident victims and small business owners of this province, which is why, as our leader in his address on the second reading said that unless the government makes significant changes to parts of this bill, our caucus will not be able to support it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place this afternoon on behalf of the people in Halifax Needham, the constituency that I represent here, where the issue of auto insurance is of primary concern. Mr. Speaker, as many members, most members in this House, I come here from a constituency that's very diverse, that has a large middle-income community, but as well many seniors, many people on fixed low incomes, quite a few of them who work, as well to augment low incomes. People who would be characterized, I guess, as members of the working poor, who often require vehicles in order to be at work, as well as people with disabilities, people on pensions, disability pensions, mothers with small children, who increasingly are attempting to get into the labor force, primarily because of the new Income Assistance Act, as well as many small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofit organizations that have vehicles in order to conduct the work of their organizations. Now, Mr. Speaker, many of us, when we calculate our monthly budgets, we look at the fixed costs on which we have no other choice but to spend money. And included in our fixed costs are our shelter costs, our rent or our mortgage, our property taxes, heat, lights, and the insurance on our homes or condominiums, apartments. And Mr. Speaker, that's a whole other area, and it's an area of growing concern, home insurance, and something that we have a great deal of concern about in the NDP caucus. But as well, we look at our transportation costs. Perhaps we're making car payments, and certainly if we own an automobile, we have the cost of insurance. And we see the car insurance issue, Mr. Speaker, as a question of fairness in terms of transportation being one of those fixed costs that are necessities of life. Everybody needs to be able to move around freely in their communities, to participate in the activities in their communities, to get to work, to maintain contact, and be involved in the community. And given that we are a society that has probably quite a high dependence on the automobile, which again is something that we need to be very cognizant of and think about, I think, is how we move away from the kind of dependence that we have. But in many respects, particularly in the rural parts of this province, there's no option but to have a very high level of dependence on automobiles, and therefore that means that inevitably the question of the fixed costs of insurance is one that's always going to have some significance in how people look at this issue. And so it's obviously one of those bread and butter issues. And it has, as everybody recognizes, I think, become more of an issue because of the skyrocketing insurance rates that people have experienced, certainly in the last year and a half in this province. Now, when I look at Bill 1 and I try to understand the implications of Bill 1, I look at it as a layperson. I sort of joke with my colleagues that this is probably the only time where I'd kind of like to be a lawyer, so that I could understand more of the implications of changing the tort system, which I understand this bill has great implications for. But I approach this as a layperson, starting from the level of my constituency and the people in my constituency who have brought to me their issues and concerns, specific issues and concerns with respect to their insurance coverage and the problems that they have had in keeping their vehicles insured and operating. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a moment just to review a few of those concrete examples, because these are the examples that then I will lay against Bill 1 to help me determine whether or not Bill 1 will in fact assist these people. Mr. Speaker, I have had a former federal public servant who has taken early retirement due to a disability come to me. This is a woman who, when she worked for the federal public service, had a very modest income, and consequently her pension now and her monthly income, fixed income, is quite modest. She drives an older model car. She has seen an increase in her monthly insurance payments of such a significant amount that she's no longer able to insure her vehicle, and she was under an enormous amount of stress and strain when she came to see me in my constituency office around the time last spring when the government introduced legislation imposing a freeze on insurance rates. And the reason she came to see me, Mr. Speaker, was that she had actually gotten a renewal notice for her premiums on her automobile after the government had introduced their legislation. And when she noticed that her insurance premiums were not being frozen, they were in fact going up, she contacted her insurance agent and was told that the government legislation did not apply in her case because the rate increases that she was being hit with had already been approved. And she was very upset, and I believe she wrote the Premier, and I'm not entirely sure if she ever received a response. I'm sure she did, but whether or not it was satisfactory, I rather doubt, Mr. Speaker. I also had contact from a senior whose husband has Alzheimer's, and their automobile was sitting in the parking lot at the senior's manor uninsured, and it was a decision that she had taken with a great deal of reluctance, but out of the necessity. Her husband was about to go into a senior's manor. Their limited income was being taxed for certain needs that he had with respect to going into a long-term care facility, and so she had these choices to make. neither one of these two constituents were constituents who found themselves in the situation of having their car insurance placed in facilities insurance. And Mr. Speaker, we've seen a whole number of people. There's been a huge increase in the number of people who have been moved from the regular insurance plans into this facilities insurance area, the area ostensibly for high-risk consumers. Yet I'm seeing in my constituency, with the situations that are presented to me, people who are in the still in the general insurance categories. So I'm trying to look at Bill 1 with a view to understanding how my constituent who is the retired public servant, my constituents who are the seniors, will be impacted by this legislation, and whether or not the kinds of reductions that the government claims that will be realized from Bill 1 will make a difference for these people. Will a 20% reduction in premiums, which will not be necessarily the industry standard, make a difference in the lives of these two people who have come to me? And Mr. Speaker, I'm very discouraged to say that my reading of Bill 1 is that neither one of these women who are constituents of mine will be able to insure their cars because of Bill 1. Mr. Speaker, there's a large low-income community in my riding, and there's a bit of a myth or a fallacy out there. I've encountered it on numerous occasions. People have said that the auto insurance issue is not a low-income issue. It's not an issue that affects people with low incomes or people, indeed, who live in poverty. And my response has been, when I hear this, that this is not my experience. While it's certainly true that many people with low incomes don't own automobiles in my constituency, it's also true that many people with low incomes do own automobiles in my constituency. And as recent as this, the power outage that just happened, I encountered a constituent who's a single mom who has disabilities, and she has diabetes, and she lives in one of the public housing areas, and she has a 1984 vehicle that she hasn't been able to insure, and because of the skyrocketing car insurance rates. And I tell people that if you go to the areas in my constituency that people have sometimes stereotyped, but also tend to see as the low-income areas, you can't find parking spaces in some of these areas. And the cars that are sitting in those parking lots belong to the people who live in those complexes, in those areas. And therefore, that tells me that people with low incomes, many of them who work, by the way, who are working at low-waged jobs, in fact do own vehicles, and they have really struggled with being able to cover the costs of their auto insurance. And probably more than any other group, this is a group who has to make a choice with taking food off the table in order to put insurance on vehicles that they require to be at work. I know one gentleman in my constituency who's a dad with his wife stays at home and works in the home, and they have 3 children. His job is in the early hours of the morning over in Burnside when the buses aren't running. And he lives in North End, Halifax. He needs a vehicle in order to get back and forth to work, Mr. Speaker, and he's had a very difficult time, and he has this dilemma. to work to support his family, which he wants to do, but the cost of insurance has become prohibitive to his being at work. So I look at this piece of legislation, and I think anybody would say, if they were offered a 20% reduction in a fixed cost in their household budget, that would be a great thing. But the problem, as I understand this legislation, is that the 20% it's temporary. It doesn't last for more than a year. It will terminate in November of 2004. So this is not a long-term solution for people. This is a stopgap measure for a problem that has gone on now for a year and a half. And so I feel, on behalf of my constituents, that we need more than stopgap measures. We really need a solution that will adequately tackle this problem and provide some stability. And sooner or later, some government is going to have to take this issue on in a serious way and provide the stability that we need. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, about this is Bill 1, as I understand it, will not apply across the board. There is no guarantee that every person who has an insurance policy will realize a 20% reduction in their fees. This is sort of a general target, and then how it actually filters down to the individual with the automobile is dependent on a whole variety of characteristics, and that individuals may in fact be required to have the same, in order to have the same amount of coverage that they now have, they may be required to purchase add-on kinds of insurance, and so reductions will not actually be realized by people in the long run for the same kinds of coverage that they have now. So, Mr. Speaker, as has been said here many times, the problems in the system are the skyrocketing insurance rates, the discriminatory aspects of how insurance operates, the fact that people were moved from general insurance categories into the facilities insurance simply because of their age or sometimes their gender. The fact that we have more people driving uninsured has been an issue. And so these are all problems that need to be addressed in a comprehensive way. And there's been a bit of revisionist history has gone on in the debate, Mr. Speaker. The members of the third party like to say that they were the first party to raise the issue of skyrocketing insurance rates here in the House of Assembly. But I think if any fair-minded person went back and looked at the record, Mr. Speaker, what they would find, in fact, that the issue was raised by the member for Cape Breton Centre and the member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour, who both raised this issue numerous occasions in question period. And certainly, while it's true that the members of the third party did propose an all-party committee to look at this issue, and it is true that members of this party declined the invitation to participate in such an all-party committee. I think what the honourable members from the third party failed to say when they raised this is why that was the case. And so I think it's important to put on the record that members of this party declined the opportunity to participate in an all-party select committee to look at skyrocketing insurance with the members of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party was simply because it was clear to us that members of the government party would have a majority on that committee, and that this would become an opportunity not to find solutions, but to drag our feet, be flat-footed, and not move toward a real action kind of plan to deal with these issues, as we have seen so many times with the use of select committees. I believe the select committee on skyrocketing auto insurance rates in Newfoundland had been, in fact, studying this issue in excess of 4 years, perhaps 5 years. And certainly the NDP caucus did not want to get bogged down into that kind of inactivity. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, as we all know here, select committees are a very important opportunity for members of this House to go out and hear from Nova Scotians from all walks of life in terms of what their experiences are. But select committees don't have attached to them the the research resources that are required to do a really good job in terms of investigating and analyzing and examining what goes on in other jurisdictions, for example. And Mr. Speaker, you know, during that whole time, it was the NDP caucus who brought forward the idea of a consumer advocate, and we, in fact, invested a fair amount of our caucus's resources in doing not just public consultation with seniors groups and people from the insurance industry and people in the trucking industry and various other consumer groups, litigators about what was wrong with the current insurance system and ways that it might be fixed. We took our time to systematically gather up the information and look at what was occurring in other provinces. And through that process of the NDP task force, we were able to determine, Mr. Speaker, that there were at least 4 other provinces in Canada where auto insurance rates were lower and fairer than is the case in the province of Nova Scotia. And lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, the provinces where this is the case are the provinces where there is a publicly owned and operated auto insurance system. So, Mr. Speaker, it was through that process of thoughtful research and information gathering and analysis that we arrived at the position of the NDP caucus. And, Mr. Speaker, you know, there are some things that government can do, and I think that is an important message for members of this legislature to put forward. And one of the things that government has done better in this country, and the evidence is there, is public auto insurance. It is one of the things that governments that have committed themselves to introducing public auto can be very proud of. And the reports that the NDP Task Force on Insurance that have been tabled in this House and that are available through our caucus demonstrate, I think, quite clearly the case that public auto insurance is indeed something that can be held up as a system that works much better for consumers than the private sector has been able to do. And all you need to do is look at the evidence of the provinces in the last 2 years where there have been just incredible problems around private auto. And those provinces are all the province of Ontario, the province of Alberta, the province of Nova Scotia, the province of New Brunswick, the province of PEI, and the province of Newfoundland. So, Mr. Speaker, it's not rocket science in terms of what is the best solution to providing the kind of long-term stability and lower and fair rates for Nova Scotians than what we currently see. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Bill 1 does a number of things, including caps at $2,500 the compensation that a person can have for a soft tissue injury, or for what the bill describes as an injury that is not of a permanent and serious nature. And today, Mr. Speaker, we had distributed to all members of this legislature a report, the actuary report that the government commissioned from the government commissioned from the KPMG. And Mr. Speaker, I haven't had time to read this report in any detail, but I'm quite surprised when I look at the categories in this report for whom this capping will now apply. Well, let me start with the things for which there will still be an ability for the tort law to deal with: death, quadriplegia, paraplegia, permanent brain injury, amputation of a major member, loss of sense, internal organ, disfigurement, scarring, serious laceration, serious burn, or TMJ. But the things that will not, the things now that will be subject to this minimum payment of $2,500 are amputation, fracture, a weight-bearing fracture, other fracture, neck sprain or strain, back sprain, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, concussion. Mr. Speaker, this is really, it's quite shocking to see what is being excluded now from the tort system, and a capping of the benefits that can flow from what can be quite a serious injury. And Mr. Speaker, I know in question period we'll have many opportunities to ask questions about some of the information contained in this report, but my very quick reading of this report indicates that the consultants to the government estimated that at least 50% of the current claims in the province of Nova Scotia will be eliminated completely, eliminated from under Bill 1. Mr. Speaker, surely the insurance industry must be laughing with glee about what the government is proposing here and the implications for Nova Scotian drivers. So, Mr. Speaker, this is something that we will have to take more time, this report, to look at, but a quick reading of this report would indicate that everything my colleague, the member from Halifax Fairview, had to say about this, about the implications of Bill 1 are true, and probably even more so than what he estimated. Mr. Speaker, the last point I want to make before I take my seat in this debate is I want to speak to the information that's being tossed around here on the floor with respect to the costs of setting up a government-run auto insurance system, because this information has been tossed out a couple of times by members of the third party without citing any of the sources where they're getting the information that they're getting. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that, and I will table this report gladly.
Order, please. No member for Halifax Needham has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will table this report. Most members, I assume, of the House would have received from the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which is the lobbyist organization for the insurance industry, would have received a letter this week and some other materials from the Insurance Bureau, who have been investing heavily in a public relations campaign to discredit public auto insurance because they're scared skinny that Nova Scotians are cottoning on to the kind of treatment that they have been getting at the hands of the private insurers. And they're not about to continue to have the wool pulled over their eyes. And Mr. Speaker, I have never seen such shoddy research put in print. If this was handed in to me by one of my students, I would give it back and tell them that they have to rewrite and provide evidence. This is really quite incredible. The information at the back of this, in this appendix, that talks about the cost of setting up a public auto system uses information like more than $1 billion, $1,220 million for something they call additional for public policy goals. It's literally, these figures are picked from the air, Mr. Speaker. They have absolutely no basis in reality, and frankly, this report is not really worth the paper it's written on. So, Mr. Speaker, I will table this so that people are very clear about where members of the third party are getting their information with respect to what the cost of the setting up of a public auto insurance system. And let's be clear, the information that they're citing comes from the insurance industry itself, who have been running the public relations campaign every day in every newspaper in this province. They have been literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to hold back the public tide, which is a tide that wants to see this problem of a fixed piece of everybody's household income who drives an automobile addressed with a stable, long-term solution that will allow people to have the accessible transportation that they require, and they deserve just as much as the taxpayers and the consumer in the province of Saskatchewan, in the province of Manitoba, in the province of BC, and certainly to a great extent in the province of Quebec. And Mr. Speaker, we in this province should settle for nothing less. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. If I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader, be to close debate on Bill number 1. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've had a very vigorous debate on Bill number 1, and quite obviously there are many opinions as to as to what action government should take with regard to auto insurance. Mr. Speaker, we believe that this act is sound. We believe it's for the benefit of all Nova Scotian consumers, and we believe, Mr. Speaker, that we have covered most of the bases. That's not to say, however, Mr. Speaker, that there are not some small changes that may be useful for consideration during law amendments or when we get into committee of the whole House on bills and clause by clause. And Mr. Speaker, certainly the government would welcome suggestions from the opposition, suitable amendments that we could consider at that time. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank all members of the House that have taken part in this debate, and Mr. Speaker, I now move for second reading.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 1. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary minded? Nay. Motion is carried. Clerk will read the title.
Bill numbered 1, entitled An Act to Amend the Laws Respecting Automobile Insurance.
Or this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on Monday at the hour of 4 p.m. The House will sit from 4 until 10. The order of business following the daily routine will be public bills for second reading, and we'll be starting with Bill number 2, the Retail Business Uniform Closing Day Act and Labor Standards Code Act. 4 till 10.
Motion is the House adjourned till 4 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried as the House adjourned till 4 p.m. on Monday.